Thank you. I move the motion and I'm sharing time with my colleagues. I have 5 minutes. You can stop me after 5 minutes. Minister, this PMB is an attempt to put balanced regional development and investment in public transport centre of government and central to tackling the climate change crisis. The National Development Plan was to be the litmus test of the government, to test the government's commitment to regional development, and I believe that's a test that they have failed. Right now, workers and families are being hit hard by carbon taxes. This is not only unfair, but also an environmental strategy that isn't going to work. Taxes designed to change behaviour only work when the people have alternatives. This motion is crystal clear. We need state-led investment in strategic infrastructure for our regions. We have decades of evidence of how successive governments have failed to deliver for rural Ireland. Not least the West is categorised by the EU as a region in transition. So this isn't a case of just a political party saying that governments haven't delivered for the West. This has been said by the EU as well and many other commentators. So we desperately need state-led investment in infrastructure, but sadly we seem to have another government that's unwilling to lead. We have 94,000 kilometres of regional and local roads across the state that provide vital connectivity for rural Ireland and to rural Ireland. Yet despite years of empty promises in Mayo, we still don't have delivery on the likes of the N26 and the R312. Sinn Féin have brought forward this motion to give the government a second chance, a chance for them to show voters that they are serious about regional transport infrastructure, that they are serious about reducing carbon emissions, and that they have a vision for our country beyond maintaining the status quo and blocking change. This motion is a direct response to the government failure to deliver on very modest demands for investment in infrastructure in the regions. The motion calls on the government to provide clarity on all projects included in the National Development Plan, ensuring balanced regional development is prioritised in the delivery of projects, to introduce a requirement for government to undertake rural impact assessment of all policies, and to prepare a new all-Ireland national aviation policy that recognises the impact the pandemic has had on our regional airports, such as Ireland West Airport, Knock. Resource bus air via the National Transport Authority, and to ensure there is no curtailment on the intercity expressway services. Urgently deliver key public transport projects such as those outlined in the Cork Metropolitan Area Strategy and the Galway Transport Strategy. On the issue that is very close to my heart, like many people in Mayo and across the West, this motion calls specifically on the government to fully commit to the delivery of the Western Rail Corridor extension to Mayo. The Western Rail Corridor has become a byword for regional development and investment in the West. So why has the Irish Rail 2040 rail freight strategy not even been released yet? The strategy has remained unpublished for almost a year, and it's referenced in a number of recent publications, including the terms of reference for the Rail Review and the draft consultation for the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy published today. The West won't forgive another government for failing to deliver on this project. If this government does not support this motion and commit to the Western Rail Corridor, then what little faith the people have in Mayo and across the West have left in them will continue to erode and to disappear. The publication of the economic report by the former ESRI economist, Dr. John Bradley, earlier this year confirmed what Sinn Féin have been saying for years, that restoring the rail connection between Galway and Mayo via Tuam has a strong business case, that the Western Rail Corridor should be reopened and prioritised as a capital project. And many government TDs in the West have been very critical of the National Development Plan and the complete lack of any commitment to the Western Rail Corridor. And they are right, Minister. They are right. Not including the project in the National Development Plan is a real missed opportunity for the Government to show that it is committed to the regional development in the West. So I call on all members of Government to take this second chance and support regional infrastructure development and the reopening of the Western Rail Corridor by voting in favour of this Sinn Féin motion. Gormagat.
Now, who's next? Deputy O'Rourke.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on the motion, and I think in terms of the National Development Plan, it was quite incredible to think on the day it was launched, we were told by Minister Ryan that there were projects in the plan that would never be delivered. And to any of us that read it, that made sense, because there was €5.1 billion for new roads, €800 million of that was already committed to roads at construction, but there was a long list of 30-odd projects at least at a cost of roughly €1 billion each, and we could see straight away that the numbers didn't add up. Despite this, 2 days later, to appease disgruntled backbenchers, we were told by the Taoiseach that there were things that weren't in the plan that would be delivered. And that really said it all. It's exactly what you get when you have a coalition pulling in different directions and for different reasons. It was very clear that they couldn't agree what needed to come out of the plan, so nothing came out of the plan. And it was an absolute charade, an embarrassment, a joke, if it wasn't so serious. Because, of course, there are any amount of reasons why we can say that the National Development Plan is hugely important. It should be a statement of the commitment of the state to lead, to deliver balanced regional development and to deliver strategic development. I think there's an important point that hasn't been picked up on. I think it is an important one. It seems to be a dangerous shift in decision-making processes. Instead of trying to create an overarching plan in a logical way, there's a shift to a kind of survival of the fittest. So projects will proceed, we're told, on the basis of which ones get through planning and reach the starting line first, the famous decision-making gates. And it'll be very difficult in this scenario to provide a counterbalance to the already dominant regions. I could go on, Minister, in terms of rail and roads. The plan is not good enough. You have a second chance to support the Sinn Féin motion tonight to get it right. Gormagat.
Cócha ara go bhfuil an stáití tech ar níomhar agus ar na pobl túthe marall ar aspa in eisteachta cuí agus níl sa phlean forbartha náisiúnta ach leanúint den trócht sin. Ní féidir goid gan na torthaí den trócht sin a eáil nuair bhreaning tú ar stáid na móithre i Conamara. Tá an ó Jas agus an encuig ní ó thuaí andáinseach ar fad. Agus ní féidir le daoine rothíocht nó siúlarthab go sábhailte agus bíonn timpistí orthú go minic. Tá grúpa sa gar rua ag impú ar an stáit ar blianta le haid muoinú go chosán agus go chóram ar bhóthar go áirta agus tá siad ag fannacht go fóil. Dúir de héin bóthar cún na linge i gceantar na nile na nuirí, bhí an bóthar churbach ar ghí na dul chuig an obair agus ar scáil marall gohfuil sé fear faoi isce chomh minic sin. Agus tá muintear na háte ras muc anmhuatha go méid droch himpiste ar móthar marall ar na páil mhór atá an agus nach bhfuil cosán ná sáilte air. Agus a glór samplaí eile ar fad Conamara. We also see this lack of investment in other aspects of daily life in rural Ireland. The X2020 bus route is not reinstated, despite the fact that thousands of people in rural towns and villages relied on that route. And earlier this year, the 51 bus service was also cut back severely, leaving it with no evening journeys after 5 p.m. Now, thankfully, after intense criticism, that decision was rolled back, but only slightly. And rather than fully reinstating the service with one bus leaving every hour until 8, there is now only the 7:05 service. Even before these cuts were made, rural Ireland needed more public transport, not fewer. And the NDP has also failed to commit to a Western Rail Corridor corridor, something that is desperately needed to build connection between our communities in the West. And it seems we all share a vision of an Ireland with less reliance on personal motor vehicles, but until it's time to realise that vision without policy and funding, it won't happen. And finally, I will raise one more piece of infrastructure with you, Minister, and that is central to the success of coastal areas like our constituency. So for communities which are built around the sea, like many areas in Connemara and particularly our offshore islands, a safe and functional pier is absolutely vital. So Minister, I'd encourage you to support this motion tonight.
Deputy Curran.
Minister, in 2019, the EU downgraded the West and the North West region from a developed region to a region in transition. And this, of course, isn't something that just happened. It is the direct consequence of the very fact that our region has been at the bottom of the table when it comes to government investment in health, in roads and in third-level education. It is a direct result of the failure of successive governments to invest in critical infrastructure and to ensure that west of the Shannon got its fair share. And unfortunately, by the looks of the National Development Plan, this government have failed to grasp the very serious situation that our region finds itself in. We do have an opportunity under the EU Regional Development Fund, and that means that under that fund, every €100 that this government will spend in our region, they will provide €60 of that contribution. Now, that is an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss out on. And if you take public transport as just one example, we have a situation, my colleague has just referenced the loss of the 20x20 Dublin to Galway route, a very important transport route covering a number of rural towns from Ballinasloe to Ahascra, all along that route cut. Then you have the situation with the local link. I had written to the NTA looking for an increase in the local link, a really important route from Balladreen to Roscommon, again stopping in rural towns and villages that have no access to public transport whatsoever. And I'm told that the NTA are there to increase the network and to work with local link to increase the network, but we don't have money to do it. So on the one hand, we are crippling ordinary people with diesel and petrol prices, some which have never seen the likes of it before. There are no alternatives. The very few alternatives that are there, like the local link, like the 20x20, are being pulled, or we don't have money to fund them. So this government needs to make a decision. Are we going to fund the alternatives? Are we going to make it easier for people to access those alternatives? Or are we going to keep cutting vital public transport networks and not funding the ones that are existing to make them better? So that's the decision that has to be made. And it's not just investment in public transport, it is investment right across the board to ensure that those of us who call the West of Ireland home can live there and can raise families there and can live there contently.
Pierce Doherty.
Minister, you take a map of the island and you find your way to Donegal. If you're leaving from this capital city here, if you're leaving from Dublin, then you're lucky, because you'll have a motorway for the first 30 minutes of your journey. But then you're going to be driving on a mix of national and secondary roads, often on windy roads, poorly lit roads and dire conditions. If you're going to where I'm from, in Gweedore or somewhere in Inishowen, your journey is going to take you over 4.5, possibly up to 5 hours. And is it any wonder that our towns and our villages in rural Ireland are suffering? To retain the talent and to attract investment, the infrastructure to support the North West and other parts of rural Ireland is simply not there. And Donegal is one of the few counties in the state, 3 in this state, that don't have access to rail. The last time a train travelled through Donegal, my mother was a teenager. Now, I welcome the comments from Minister Ryan where he said that a rail network to the North West, as he termed it, is absolutely doable. It is long overdue, but any railway to Donegal must directly connect the region to Donegal via stops along the way, be they in Tyrone, Monaghan or Meath. That is the vision and ambition that the North West needs. Investment in rural transport and infrastructure must also include investment in our bus services. Last week I raised the issue of Bus Éireann route, which connects Donegal town to Dublin, and was cancelled 183 times in the past 2 years. You couldn't make that up. 183 times cancelled. That's happening without warning and often without proper notice via bus airing. What happens is people are standing on the side of the road in the dead of night, no idea whether the bus is going to show. Constituents have contacted me. They've told me how they've missed flights, how they've missed appointments. So this government's launched another flashy brochure about major investment in new rural bus services, and people are literally standing at the side of the road wondering if the bus will turn up. And 183 times in the last 2 years it has failed to do so. So I'm asking you for an urgent review in relation to Route 30 with bus airing to resolve these problems. So mar sinna ceann comhairle, takeíonn le rún Sinn Féin an North agus tan méide tá cotha chun tosaigh mo fuartaí leis an neistíar ceart agus na structure ceart a thur agree sa dóis go mbeadh infrastructure don chead sky do mo chun da chéan gúnaál agus réigeanna eile tuaiche ar fud na tíre gur maigad.
An Chuck the Martin Brown le dul.
Sinn Féin has brought this motion before the House today because rural Ireland is sick and tired of being paid lip service there. Rural communities have been dismissed by government for far too long. The days of the development plans being used to stall real action must end and must end now. During my time in the Dáil, I've constantly made representations about the shortcomings of our public transport links, but what actions have been taken? Has the timetable between Limerick Junction and Waterford been adjusted? No, it hasn't. Has the same been done for the Ballybrophy line? No. Has the X12 service been restored for Roscrea and Nina? No, it hasn't. Has the Minister for Transport any intention of stop rolling work closures on the Ballybrophy line in favour of getting the job done in one go? No, he hasn't. Indeed, he didn't even give me his views on the matter when I asked in a PQ. And when announcing the Connecting Ireland Rural Transport Plan recently, we were told that the new standard for rural bus services is at least 3 return trips daily. So why does this standard not apply to the North Tipperary and South Tipperary rural rail lines? Can we get an answer to that? Rural Ireland continues to face the same old struggles to do business or to travel to work or education or even to hospitals. Yet the National Development Plan, as much attention was given to plans to extract water from the Shannon and was given to any projects for my county. That says a lot about this government. TDs like myself may stand here on the Dáil and outline specifically what our constituents and rural businesses need, but this government persists in ignoring our citizens. We see the government clapping itself on the back for its plans to reduce emissions by freeing up town centres. Try convincing the people of Tipperary town of your concerns. There was no mention of the need for a bypass to Tipperary town at all in the National Development Plan, despite it constantly being raised here in this House. We just saw the N24 project being relegated to a subject of approval status. This is hardly a ringing endorsement of the project. We need clarity on this and on all the projects alluded to in the National Development Plan. These are just some of the reasons that we needed to bring forward this motion. Rural Ireland needs a balanced approach to development that helps our towns, villages and rural communities and listens to them. In this bill, we proposed a statutory requirement that all government departments and public bodies will undertake rural impact assessments in relation to measures that have a socio-economic impact on rural Ireland. We need this government to come clean with the people instead of delaying matters in the guise of glossy brochures, and we ask them to support this motion.
Thank you very much. Deputy Martin Kenny.
Minister, this motion is really about ensuring that we have establish a proper infrastructure in place across all of rural Ireland, that people can function and live to their full potential. And at present, due to the failure of past governments and current government, that is not simply the case. Certainly, I know that the Western Rail Corridor is one of the key infrastructure projects which needs to be delivered for the west of Ireland to ensure that it can be competitive and can bring industry and bring commerce and bring productivity back into that region. And yet, government continues to turn its face against it, and that's one of the things that I think the transport infrastructure policy of this government needs to have a clear focus on. Delivering the Western Rail Corridor. That needs to happen as an absolute priority. The other issue which we continue to have issues with is the whole issue of buses, and where our bus network across the country has huge problems. Fortunately, County Leitrim has been part of a pilot project recently with the local link, where we have improvement in the number of buses on the roads that are connecting all our small towns and villages into Carrick and Shannon, into Sligo, into other areas, and there are more people using them. So it proves the point that if the infrastructure is put in place, people will use that infrastructure and ensure that it is delivered. But government continues, and this has been a policy for many, many years, where they put pilot projects in place, proves that the thing works, and then put it nowhere else. And we've seen that happen time and time again. So we want to make sure that does not happen in this particular context, and that the work that has been done from the point of view of the local link project is spread across the entire country and expanded upon, because that's what needs to happen. The other issue that I want to raise with you is the issue of school bus transport, which has been an issue almost continuously every year, that we have children left standing along the side of the road that can't get a bus to school. And that is absolutely key for people living in rural areas, that they make sure that they have transport to send their children to school in every part of the country, not just in some select areas, which seems to be the policy of this government up to now. The other issue I want to raise with you is in regard to aviation, and particularly Knock Airport and Ireland West. And the local authorities across the West have come together to put money aside to try and help to develop Knock Airport, because, again, it is a key strategic piece of infrastructure that needs to be developed to develop the West, and to ensure that we put the potential of the people in the West are there for future generations to come. And unfortunately, government continues to put all its emphasis on a few small areas, mainly in the capital city here. And indeed, we see that what has happened today, that the government is actually pulling what money it was going to deliver, even for the capital city. So, you know, there's a huge problem. A huge problem that we have continuously highlighted, that people living in rural Ireland needs to get fair play and need to ensure that they are delivered some sense of fair play to them. And that is absolutely one of the things that is key to all of this, is having adequate transport infrastructure in place. The National Development Plan, you know, is full of promises, but very, very little hope for the people out there who want to get delivery of all of these projects.
Thank you, Deputy Kenny. Sinn Féin, where Deputy Thomas Gould is sharing with Deputy Stanley, Burke and Brady.
Minister, last week in Cork, we saw the announcement of Bus Connects. Unfortunately, there are huge areas of Cork that will miss out on any public transport or proper public transport. Rural areas that have come into the city boundary are particularly affected. The government talk about the importance of reducing the effects on climate change and saving the environment, and about preventing global warming. Yet the things that make actually the most sense, that won't destroy people's lives, are just not being done. We've got areas like Carricknavar, Whitechurch, and many other areas that are on the periphery of the city that will only have buses every 2 hours. So how is this providing public transport for people? Over the summer, we were out back canvassing and knocking at doors and meeting people again. And we were going to doors where there's 4 houses with our 4 cars. The husband and the partner, or the husband and the mother having the car, the son who might be going to college, the daughter who might be going to work. 4 cars in each house. Like, how, like if we're talking about proper transport systems, proper public transport, how are we going to get people out of their cars? So, for a lot of people living in these towns and villages, what has come out of COP26 means nothing to them, because the bus connects that they need means nothing to them because it's not being supplied, and that's going down to the government's failure, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and the Green Party, a failure to deliver proper public transport. Alongside this, we have the scandalous price of public transport, in particular the train from Dublin to Cork. I checked just this afternoon. The cost of bringing a family with 2 adults and 2 children up from Cork to Dublin is almost €200. So if you're trying to get people out of a car who want to come to Dublin for events or holidays and what have you, how can you justify that kind of expenditure compared to using the car? Like, using the car, they could stop off, they could have food, they could get fuel, and it'd be at least half the price. So what this means is the government needs to care about providing public transport that's affordable for people. And you can't travel into a city on the bus at the moment in many parts of Cork, and many people cannot afford to use the train.
Deputy Stanley.
Thanks, Sean Corley. The motion this evening is about recognising the importance of regional transport and for it to be financially backed. For years I've been calling for the construction of the Mountmellick N80 bypass. This is an important regional infrastructure, Minister, and it has been promised for decades with very little progress. A feasibility study has been done. That's completed back last year. We need to see ambition in terms of from government around regional transport, and it needs to be backed up with money. The Mountmellick bypass is based on a very busy route, the N80, connecting the Midlands and the West to the port of Rosslare, which is even more significant now due to Brexit, because hauliers are using this route to get goods to Rosslare and directly to the continent and bypassing the British land bridge, and understandably so. The current situation is completely unacceptable and ignores the serious traffic issues on the ground in Mountmellick. You have trucks choking up the centre of the town, junction in the middle of Mountmellick, a T-junction. Lorries have to cross over to the wrong side of the road, the very far side of the road, County Corla, to get around this. And this presents dangers. Despite all of this, the project is not included in the National Development Plan. I put a parliamentary question to the Transport Minister sometime back and was informed that the project is not even listed on the National Roads Programme 2018-27. And as I said, no mention of it in the National Development Plan. So I'd ask the Minister to sincerely to look at that again, the N80. It's carrying huge amounts of traffic, including from your county to the west. You know, traffic going from the west, Mayo, Roscommon, all those counties to the port of Rosslare is going right to the centre of Mountmellick. And I'd ask the Minister to revisit that. I also want to raise the need for bus shelters in the short time I have. I've been raising this with the National Transport Authority for years, and if we're going to get people using buses, we have to provide bus shelters. Borris-Nostri, Mountrat and Castletown on the R445 need bus shelters. Ballyline and Newtown and Creheyard on the N77 need bus shelters. If we're expecting people to use the bus, that's what we have to do. People catching the bus in those localities are getting soaked on a wet day or a wet morning, going to work or to a hospital appointment or anything else. So bus shelters are a fundamental piece of infrastructure, and I want to ask the Minister to take this up with the NTA. Why is it so difficult to get a bus shelter in place? In the neighbouring jurisdiction just up the road, they're all over the place. There's bus shelters everywhere for school kids and all, even for the school transport. So I would say to you that we need to give that role to the local authorities and let the local authorities provide them. They will fix it and get them up. The NTA is not the body. If you have to write to somebody in Dublin about a bus shelter at Creheyard, the game is lost. That needs to be done at local council level. And I just appeal to you, Minister, during your time in office, to devolve that power down. Thank you.
Deputy Johnny Gork.
Thanks, Count Corla. Minister, with the draft transport strategy for the Greater Dublin area announced today, the people of Meath and surrounding counties will be hugely disappointed by your government again tonight, but they will not be surprised. Today it has been revealed that building works on the Navan rail line that we have been demanding for decades will not commence until 2031 at the very earliest, and given the shambolic record of this government in delivering projects, most likely a decade or more after that. We're in the middle of a climate emergency where building the Navan rail line could do more for the environment than any other project, taking thousands of cars off the road. Meath is the 5th largest county in the state, 210,000 people and growing. Navan is the largest town in Ireland not serviced by rail. 81% of people leaving Meath to work do so by car. I spoke to a lady the other day who was asking me about the Navan rail line and when it might be built. She told me every day she goes to work leaving Meath for Dublin, she pays €6 every day on tolls, €15 a day parking in Dublin and €100 on fuel for the week. That's over €200 a week just to get to work and home. Minister, is getting to the stage where people are not able to afford to get to work. We are spending €2 billion a year on congestion. For many years now, the people of Meath have been left behind by successive governments, spending up to 10 hours a week extra of their lives away from family due to overpacked buses, traffic congestion. This is entirely unacceptable. The people of Meath and beyond will not accept a start date of 2031 for the Navan rail line. We have waited long enough already. Yet again, this is another example in a climate emergency of a government out of touch, out of ideas and without foresight, failed to deliver the Navan rail line at your peril. Thank you.
Thanks, Count Corla. Minister, last week we seen the government announce the climate action plan. Unfortunately, today what we've seen in the producing of the NTA's draft transport strategy 2022 up to 2042 is again a failure to bring forward ambition. There's certainly no ambition when it comes to Wicklow. Unfortunately, we have a government that, when it comes to Wicklow, gets very, very little mention in it, particularly West Wicklow, which has little or no public transport. We have the government blocking the upgrade of the N81, a critical piece of infrastructure. And yes, if the government were saying, yes, we're serious about taking 500 car journeys off the road on a daily basis, well then you'd think they would be putting in place the public transport. But in the NTA strategy, there is no mention whatsoever of West Wicklow in terms of extending the Lewis from Tala out to Blessington. There's no provision for increased bus services. On the other side of the county, Minister, when we look at the Dublin to Rosslare rail line, again, very, very little in terms of plans that can be rolled out immediately. What we're talking about is the possibility of extending the Dart down to Wicklow Town, which has been talked about over the last number of years, which is badly needed. But according to this plan, it may happen within the next 20 years. Again, a failure of ambition. There's been talk over the last decade of extending the Lewis down as far as Bray. And again, that was contained in previous plans with the possibility of maybe getting that brought forward before the year 2030. Again, in this plan, it could be 2042, Minister, before that actually takes place. Unfortunately, Minister, when we look at the two main roads within the county, the M11, N11 and the N81, both congested on a daily basis. People sitting in their cars trying to commute to work because of the failure to put in place jobs within the county. But this plan, Minister, the Climate Action Plan and this NTA draft plan, we need to go back to the drawing board because it fails the people of Wicklow, fails them dismally to put in place the infrastructure, the public transport that's needed now. We have 19th century infrastructure when it comes to the railway in the county. That needs to be invested in now, Minister, not 20 years into the future.
And to close the debate, I'll return to Sinn Féin. I believe Deputy Function is beginning.
Thanks very much, Cahirlock. So first of all, I just want to commend my own colleague, Deputy Darren O'Rourke, for bringing this important motion forward today. And obviously, the constituency I represent of both Carlow and Kilkenny is a good mix of urban and rural, and while it is a fantastic place to live and work, we are certainly lacking in terms of public transport, and it's obviously an integral part to a functioning rural community, and it has an important role in reducing emissions, which we are all apparently in favour of, but when it comes to actual practice, it's hard to know if we actually are. The recent announcement in the budget of the young adult travel card, which I thought was welcome. I thought that was a positive move. However, for rural communities where we actually don't have very much public transport, it excludes private bus operators. I'm obviously an advocate for public transport, but in some of our communities where we don't have that in the interim, I think it's a missed opportunity not to roll it out to those operators, and I think that we would really benefit from that, and students in particular would benefit from that in Carlow and Kilkenny, as we've had a recent announcement about Carlow and Waterford ITs to amalgamate into a technological university for the South East. It would be hugely beneficial for students if they could avail of this, but it's just really private providers in the most part in our constituency at the moment. It is ironic that our Minister for the Environment is currently at COP flying the flag for Ireland and all that we are going to do to encourage people out of their cars and onto public transport. Yet, as I've said, we're certainly lacking in this constituency. And just to say that somebody that travels to Kilkenny the 3 days that we're up here, if I was to rely on public transport, I'd have to leave here at 6:30. Actually, leave here probably 6 p.m. to get the 6:30 train. That's the last train to Kilkenny in 2021. It's actually incredible to think that is the situation. I want to briefly mention the situation in Carlow in relation to the bus service. Finally, there's been some announcement that it's going to go out to tender, but it's not going to launch until next autumn, 2022. Imagine a town like Carlow still has no bus service, and we've only recently got a proper bus service in Kilkenny City. I'm going to run out of time very shortly, so I again just want to commend my colleague, and I would urge everybody to support the motion. And just in relation to rural communities, and Minister, you're in a rural community yourself, it really is important that we have good public transport and that there's options for people. Thanks, Cahirlock.
Minister, I just want to show you a map. I'm sure you may have seen this before. It's the Northern and Western Regional Assembly, a map that they published a number of years ago. And if you look at it very clearly, it's absolutely stark in terms of the deficit in infrastructure in the northwest of Ireland, working its way down the west.
let's just look at it. No motorway network to the 4th largest city in the island, Derry City, and Donegal. It's a region of about 500,000 people. West Tyrone, Donegal, Derry, 500,000 people, cross-border region. No rail connection, no motorway connection, and the Irish government for the last 10 years have starved the City of Derry Airport, which serves 40% of the passengers who go through the City of Derry Airport come from Donegal, 40%, and they've got no funding from the Irish government for the last 10 years. They removed the funding whenever the Derry to Dublin Airlink was taken down. So no road, motorway infrastructure, no rail and no air connecting about half the county, Donegal and all of Derry. That's stunning. Electricity infrastructure, the same. So we have said this for so many years. That's why this motion is so important tonight, that in the west of Ireland and in the northwest, we don't have a motorway or rail connection joining up the west of Ireland. When you think about this, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Sligo, Derry, all of those, that huge mass of population in the west has no connectivity in terms of motorway for nearly all of it and rail for a big part of it. It's stunning. That has to be the priority. But when you read the National Development Plan, it's not clear to me at all that this government gets the scale of the neglect of the west and northwest of my county of Donegal right down to Cork. So it needs to be addressed, it needs to be prioritised. And I agree with Deputy Cleary, we do need now a committee to grip this, because government and the senior civil servants have failed government after government, period after period. So we need a sense of urgency, an investment plan. We need to work with the likes of the Northern and Western Regional Assembly, who have no political axe to grind. They're just speaking the truth. I'll hold it up again. That is a damning indictment of the failure of our people in the West and the Northwest.
And firstly, I want to thank all of my own colleagues who, Darren O'Rourke and others from our rural constituencies, who have worked on bringing this motion forward. And I think, like others and others cross-party, the shock of reading the National Development Plan and realising that the map that Deputy McLaughlin talked about wasn't going to change under the National Development Plan. And I want to thank all other speakers who have spoken tonight as well. And rarely, and I've listened to everybody's contribution intently, and rarely has there been such consensus across the Dáil as to what we need to do. So we have to examine, firstly we have to examine who's in government and who has the ability to deliver the things that we have agreed on here tonight. And I would appeal to the colleagues, or the deputies within government, to go back to your heads of the heads of your party and to make them understand that you're the TDs who are elected to this Dáil. The senior civil servants with the pens and the paper, they aren't elected to this Dáil. And we are the people who are accountable to people who vote for us across the constituencies, because the key pieces of infrastructure that we talk about here tonight form the vision for rural Ireland. They are the catalysts for development. They are the things that we absolutely need. There are wonderful, bright people across the board in rural Ireland. We talked about some of them here tonight who were here, like Monsignor Horn that Deputy Cleary referred to, and indeed Micheál McGrail and Colman O'Rahilly, and many, many others in business and communities across rural Ireland, who have the vision and share the vision and the commitment to making rural Ireland work for us all, indeed to making the country work for us all. But they're being blocked. And we need to unblock what's happening here. And we need to challenge the analysis that's presented to us sometimes, whether that's presented to us from an auditor or from a senior civil servant. And we need to show people who is in charge here, because some of the cost-benefit analysis done, all of you know, we can make a cost-benefit analysis, say whatever we want to say, depending on the criteria that we use. We can predict the outcome. And the population-led cost-benefit analysis that's been used across the board just will not work for rural Ireland in terms of the investment decisions that need to be made. People in rural Ireland want to do their bit for climate change. In fact, they want to do more than their bit for climate change. They want to be leaders in climate change, whether it be wind energy, wave energy, and many, many other things. But we cannot do it unless you give us the basic infrastructure like public transport. The Atlantic Economic Corridor sets out a vision for us all in where we need to be along the Atlantic and the potential that's there. But again, they cannot do it without the key infrastructure that we need in it. And that's why an awful lot of these communities and businesses think that this government is out of touch, or know that the government is out of touch in how they think, in what they want and what they need to make their areas work. And they want more than launches and brochures and photos. They want more than that, and they expect post-COVID to have more than that delivered for them. The Western Rail Corridor is a shovel-ready project with 10 years of very hard work has been put into. Dr. John Bradley has concluded all of that work with the report that he forwarded. It makes economic sense, it makes social sense, it makes climate change sense in terms of freight, in terms of passengers, in terms of what we want to deliver for the West. And all politicians, the vast majority of politicians across this House agree that it needs to be delivered. We need to address that implementation deficit, and we need to get it delivered. And that really would show the intent of this government, that they are listening to the people in rural Ireland and to the west of Ireland. So I will ask again that this government would go back and would look at the Western Rail Corridor and deliver it along with the other key infrastructure projects that have been talked about here tonight. Gormagad.
Agus sé sin deire leis an níos bóireachtanach ar an tariscint maidir le bean éigear iompar réigúnach agus é críochnathe chuig mé an ceist inis agus sí an ceist nó go néontítar an tariscint. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Na teachtaí atá ar thaobh ceiste Aberdís tó. Na teachtaí atá ina cuine Aberdís níl. Sílam go bhfuil an ceist rite. It's my opinion the question is carried.